One thing is I've always felt like I've been good at different things, but I've never been successful or tried to even be successful at my own thing. So
Mm.
I think for me, this is where it circles back to just total belief. I just have total belief that if I keep working and improving and staying on the right path, then things will succeed eventually. I think one thing is I look at other people that are successful and I look and I go, well, if they can do it, I know I can do it.
Ooh, I love that.
I mean,
I love
why
that.
not? It's not, we're all human
Yeah.
beings. There's hundreds, there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people succeeding in this business every day. It's like,
Yeah.
if I just keep stay, usually if I'm not interested in something, I'll just bail on it, right? So, or if it gets too hard, just bail on it if it's not that interesting. But this is something I'm really laser focused on. So every day I think if they can do it, then I absolutely know I can too.
Silas, welcome to the Grit Factor podcast. It is an absolute honor to have you here in the studio today.
Hey, Karl, thanks for having me on. So I'm honored that you even reached out and asked me to appear on the podcast with you. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So a little disclosure, a little transparency. You and I have been working together for about 6 months now. And I've watched you navigate some incredibly choppy waters, right? So before we get into the weeds and where this conversation is going to go, I really want you to give the context or give the audience some context of who Silas was, right? And who Silas was, 17 years ago, and so forth. So if you want, or if you can, just give the audience some context on the man who you used to be versus who you are now.
Okay. Well, thanks, Karl, for having me on. I think that's a really good question. So I guess let's talk through that. So who am I? So I live in the Midwest, Indianapolis, Indiana area, married to my wife, Christine. I have a daughter in junior in high school. Her name's Lucy. And they're both wonderful. So, a little about me is that I'm in the e-commerce business, which is how I know Karl. And we'll probably dive more into this, but this is a more recent, newer full time venture for me. Prior to this, I worked for a very large Fortune 500 brokerage firm, a household name that I won't mention here, but it's a household name that everyone would know of. And I worked in our trading department for the firm, and I'd worked there for, well, over 17 years. So it had gotten to the point where I was getting older. I'm in my 50s now. The job was the stress of it, everything that came along with it. Literally, I felt like every day was killing me just to get out of bed and go there. And finally, I made a decision that my health was worth more than that. It just wasn't worth it anymore. And that if I was ever going to do anything or accomplish anything on my own, the time was now to go for it and give it a try. So, starting last year, I left. I guess you could say I retired from working there and decided to go into business for myself. And for once in my life, bet on myself. I've never ever done it before because I've always been so risk averse. But finally, for once in my life, I decided to bet on myself and go for it, something on my own.
Wow, that's awesome, man. That's awesome. 17 years, you're in a very comfortable environment, right? And for those 17 years, you were in a completely different world. You're in a corporate world. You're safe. You're secure. And a lot of people would just ride on that, right? They would just ride on that until retirement, and yeah, just ride that safety zone. And so I love what you said there in a sense of like it's time for me to bet on myself because drawing back the curtains a little bit, man. When I really first got to talking with you and getting to know you, you're like, Karl, man, I've never been the type of person who's taken risks. I'd never been that type of person who would bet on myself. I was always the type of person who just goes with the flow, essentially.
Yeah, I think being
And
scared and worried about doing anything, and I think we probably talked about getting to the point where I felt like I made too much money to really walk
Mm,
away, but then I wasn't at a point where I was really going to go anywhere either. So the
yeah.
only choice was to kind of just grind it out for another 20 years there, another 15 years, or 10
Mm,
years, never taking, being miserable or never taking a chance or betting on yourself.
yeah. Yeah. That's a great point, man. And especially in that season of your life, you're not you're not a young buck, right? Like neither am I, right? And so a lot of individuals, especially those that are seasoned like us, there's a lot of intimidation there to change direction. It's one thing to change jobs and change industries or anything like that, but going from one area or one side of spectrum where you're clocking in, you've got safety, you've got security, you've got the path ahead, right? Then going to complete opposite where you've got no safety, no security. In this, when I say safety and security, I'm talking about in the grind of the 9 to 5.
Yeah.
You know, and this is an area where I'm against the grain on because I love what Cody Sanchez said in one of her videos, um, talking about how a lot of individuals in the workforce are looking to their 9 to 5s as secure, as safety, and it's so far from the truth because any point in time, man, the market could change. Your boss can come in and say, you know what, I don't like you anymore, or I don't like the way you looked at me, or whatever the reason is. It doesn't matter, especially nowadays, and terminate you, right? At the end of the day, that boss, that employer decides your life, decides how much time you get to take vacation, how big of a house you get to have, what kind of meals, because of the amount of money you make, right? So walk me through, for if you will, the old. This is kind of take a step back for a moment. What did life look like for you in those 17 years, and what was the atmosphere like in that part of your life in that corporate world? Because you did kind of reveal that it was taking some tolls in health and some other things, but just kind of walk us through, those that are listening right now, like on the edge of the seats, like what was that environment like for you to like make you want to just leave all that? Because again, a lot of people will look at like, my God, 17 years, you're in that later season. Why not just right at retirement? So walk us
Yeah.
through that if you don't mind.
I think that, in the type of roles that I was in, it was interesting because I think you have two type of people. Well, let's say three type of people, but you mainly have two type of people. You have the type of person that is maybe younger and that they're just or older and they're just there to make an income, get paid. They don't really care. They just want to check and they just want to hang on. And
Mm,
my environment, it was a big call center environment, so you can probably imagine this when you're thinking of it. My company's in financial services, but I happen to work in a call center type of environment, even though I was in a manager there, so it was still that type of environment. But you have a lot of
mm,
people that are in that boat. Then you have a lot of people that are in the boat of, I'm going to come in and do this for a year or two, and my goal is to get out. Whether my goal
mm.
is to
Like
get
yourself.
out to like a sales role or something like that within the company, or my goal is to get out to go to another firm. That's my goal. So being on a constant grind like that, where 24-hour a day schedule, everything you do is monitored to every minute. You have X amount of time for lunch. If you're sick or something like that, it's looked at. So it's just a feeling of, think about this. Imagine every single thing you did for an 8-hour workday was recorded, monitored, reviewed, and looked at. It doesn't make you feel like you're very trusted. It really doesn't make you feel like an adult environment. So really, that's why I think there's two main types of people. You either have the one that they don't really care, They're just coming in because it pays okay. It's a good paying job. It's not about the money. I made good money actually. So,
Yeah.
or you have the type of person that they're just there. They're looking at it as like they're gonna embrace the suck for a year or two because their goal is to move out. Then you have a small sliver of people like me that have been there for such a long time that they've just ended up in this environment, and you get to a point where you make enough money that's like it's almost hard to leave, and you don't
Yeah.
want to leave your family, you don't want to do anything like that. So that's kind of how I ended up in the place of, I was literally making myself sick with being there, and everything that went into the job, and didn't feel very good. Actually, I felt really bad about how we were treating clients, and I didn't feel like we were doing the right thing ethically anymore. And one thing you had
That's kind of
mentioned,
weird.
Carl, oh, it was terrible. And one thing and there had been a lot of changes because of acquisitions and things like that over the years, where the culture of the company had changed a lot. I mean, like dramatically. Then we did a major acquisition, about 4 years before I retired, and that took multiple years for it, the integration. But that was like a total change in culture. I mean, it was dramatic change in culture, and it
Wow.
went from more of a customer focused atmosphere to more of a we just need to focus on earnings per share and churning people, clients as fast as we can. You don't like it, that's okay. We can pay someone else that will gladly take your seat. So, um,
That,
go ahead, Carl.
wow. That's horrible, man. I mean, what kind of environment does that introduce? Because not just for the customer that you're serving on the other side of the phone or the computer or anything of that nature, but being exposed to that to 8 hours a day. Yeah, man, that does wear on you. That's got to wear on you, not just physically but mentally.
Oh, it's really
And
exhausting.
yeah, right. And then we carry that home with us. We walk that, and especially when come Mondays, right? You have off the weekend. You're just starting to unwind and relax, and then you get to Sunday evening, right? And you just have this. I can imagine, right? You have this like just distress, the anxiety of like, oh my gosh, here we are, another week. So
Yeah,
hearing all this from you, let me kind of take into another chapter here, because in reading your bio and reading some of the things you said, I really want to make sure that the audience is grabbing this pivotal point for you, and this is where it kind of really turned a knife for me, because I can relate to this, right, on both sides of the coin. So as I read this, man, I'm like, I got to make sure I get this out there. So
yeah,
again, you had the security, you
yeah,
had the tenure, and again, most people would have coasted right there until retirement, but something shifted for you, right?
yep,
You mentioned a specific event or a specific wake up call involving a colleague that made you realize you couldn't wait for Sunday anymore. So
yes.
take us to that moment. Why was that tipping point? Why did that make you, hand in your notice and it's like, this is it. It's time for me to bet on myself. So
Yeah.
take us, take us to that moment, and why was that the tipping point for you?
Thinking about it in the moment while we're talking about it, I think that really there were three things that it came down to. So, one, with like any big Fortune 500 company, well, you brought this up already, Carl, so I'm glad we're circling back to it, is your employment's totally at their will. You count on them for everything you have. And didn't really think that I would be laid off or let go, but the company had been doing layoffs, especially with the different integrations, every year or two. And as you start to get older, you start to think, well, eventually, if they're laying people off every year or two, you know, what's to say they're not going to lay me off just strictly because of how much money I make, right? And I know that there's a lot of other guys that work there that I was friends with that felt the exact same way. So it didn't feel as secure anymore because there was a layoff factor. I remember We were actually on a family vacation, and oh, I was the company that I worked for. They would give you a longer period of time off as a sabbatical for every employment milestone that you hit. And I remember I was off for my one of my sabbaticals, and they did another round of layoffs. I remember being gone on vacation down in Orlando, down at Disney World, and thinking, being like totally miserable on vacation because it's like I know that they're going to do layoffs because they announced they're going. And here's the other thing: they announced they're going to do them. So you sit there and work like, well, am I going to be the one? And so I'm on vacation,
Yeah.
thinking ruining the entire time, on vacation with my family is like,
Yeah. You can't be
get
present.
back, like am I going to be the one
Yeah.
laid off? And that really made me start to think like, well, gosh, what would happen if I did get laid off? Because there's not really any other jobs like I do here, where I live.
Mm,
So I'd probably
yeah.
either have to make significantly less or I'd have to move, which not really, I could do, but I have, a daughter that's almost ready to graduate from high school. A wife has her job here. So that was a big
Yeah.
part of it. Um, I think some other things that happened too were I had started having a lot of health issues for multiple reasons.
Mm,
And one of the health issues was that it wasn't much of a health issue as much as it was just a side effect of all the stress and everything that had built up from the day-to-day grind is I was having trouble sleeping at night. I remember even one day I woke up in the middle of the night and I thought I was going to have a heart attack. And I thought to myself, I don't if if I died, that's one thing, but I just couldn't stand dying here next to my wife in bed in the middle of the night with my
mm,
daughter down with my kid with my high school age daughter down the hallway. I just couldn't, maybe I just couldn't. It just was so painful to think about that happen. And then a third thing that happened, which I think is what you're alluding to or talking about, is I had someone that I considered a good friend that worked there. We worked together. We sat next to each other. He was a really good guy. We liked to talk to each other. We worked together for multiple years. He worked at the company basically his entire life, finally retired, and within several months of retiring, he passed away. And I thought, gosh, the guy worked here for, like 30 years, and without very much fanfare, he leaves and immediately dead. And I thought to myself, I don't want to end up like that. That was after I had already left when that happened, but that's when I really said I just can't go back to doing something like that for someone else. So it's just, and one thing I thought, Carl, was like, if I didn't at least try, how would I feel if something like that happened to
mm.
me? So,
Yes. Agree. Agree. Yeah. Man, thank you for sharing that, dude. And I hope everybody listening right now is taking a good inventory of of where they're at, right? And you said this, this quote unquote someday, right? And I kind of put it out to my audience earlier before this recording, you know, that I was super excited. Well, I say was I'm super excited for this because you're putting this out there in such a way that we don't have an infinite amount of number of days, right?
yeah,
And my fear, not just for me specifically, but everybody that is still walking this blue marble is going to let the 8-year-old and the 80-year-old down, right? The 8-year-old version of you, before you had your hopes, dreams, and aspirations tainted, through adversities or through other people's programming or stories, letting that 8-year-old person, kid down because you didn't leave it all out there. And the 80-year-old person, letting that person down because you didn't fulfill those dreams, because laying on that, you're taking your last breath, you're like, man, I should have, I should have, tried at that business, or I should have done this, or I should have done that, and it's now too late,
yeah,
and I love that you put that out there because I want that to be that stark reminder that someday is not on the flipping calendar, right? It, so for all of us out there that and I've been guilty of this, where we just ignorantly think we've got tomorrow, we've got next week, we've got next month, or even next year. And I've lost a lot of good friends, in throughout my life, and especially as of late. And it's really a stark reminder that, man, we have got to wake up and go out there and chase it down, because we don't know when, we don't know if we're going to have another day. We don't know if we're going to have another week, another month, or any of that, right? So, that's just something I really wanted to kind of like pull and make sure that the audience hear this.
Yeah,
But,
you're 100% right. You don't know.
yeah,
And then if something,
yeah,
and then from a work standpoint, I kind of felt like I wanted to, it really, I started as like looking at this as a backup plan, and then that shifted to more like, well, I just need to go. If I'm going to do it, I just need to go for it, because obviously tomorrow could be my last day on earth, or it could be my last day at work. So,
yeah, absolutely. And let's kind of put this position from a person, supposed to be setting an example, right? We're both husbands, we're both fathers, and we're the ones telling our kids, go chase your dreams, go chase it down, do the best you can, right? But here we are, we're trying to play it by safe, we're trying to be secure. And again, I've been guilty of this, and I still do it to this day in some things, where I get nervous about something because, either my bank account saying, oh, you don't have that, or maybe my current ability is telling me that I don't have what it takes, right? So we always have this monster in our minds telling us, that we're not able to do something because it's not actually us, man. It's actually somebody else in our own mouth or in our own tone, right? But let me go in a different direction here, because I really want to explore another area, or dive into something else you mentioned in your bio. You have this incredible ability to execute. I've told you this, several times. You knew when you and I worked together, probably like 4 or 5 weeks in, man. I worked with a lot of people, man, and you've been among the top. Not by results. I'm talking about straight up execution, right? There's no doubt. There's no hesitancy. Well, there might have been some doubts, right? But there's no hesitancy. There's no like, well, you just freaking execute, right? You have this incredible ability to execute, but the results haven't quite caught up yet. In fact, you described your main business, your e-com business, as a money-losing, cash-eating monster.
yes.
And cash-eating monster, I kind of like to pull that of Mike Michalowicz of Profit First. He
Yes.
describes his business as being that, cash-eating monster, right? And in that bio, you also admitted to being over, or right around 100,000 in debt, right? So most people would freeze at that, right? I mean, 100K. A lot of people would have freeze at 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 80,000, but at 100,000 in the hole, you just keep moving. So how do you wake up on a Tuesday or on a Friday or any given day and look at that red number and still find the will to execute? Because a lot of people are listening right now, they're in that hole somewhere, right? They're looking at their current situation, they're looking at their current circumstances, and they're allowing that to dictate how they show up for the day, knowing that they're something away from their biggest breakthrough. And I gotta give Ed my credit for that one. But just give us, how do you find the will to execute?
I think the thing is that I'm totally convinced that I can make this work. There's no one that can convince me otherwise. Other people do this successfully. I absolutely 100% totally feel as though I can do this and be extremely successful. Now, the ways that I've gone about doing it weren't the best ways to do it. I've had some bad training along the way. I've had, I've been taken advantage of a couple of times or enrolled in some programs that were totally not worth the money. I've made a lot of bad inventory decisions. Funny you had mentioned execution because I don't look at myself as being someone very good at execution. Now, when I think of execution, I think of that as, and here's why. But I totally understand where you're coming from. I think that what it is like one of my problems is that I lose focus so easily, or I'm always willing to try something new, or I'm always willing to buy a new piece of software or something like that. I think part of it is because I always figure, okay, maybe this will be the one. This will be the one to get figured out. Now, I think I totally understand what you're talking about, though, because I've kind of got, I've gotten to the point where, like, okay, I have to get this on the right track. I know I can do this. I'm just going to do whatever Karl tells me to do. So that's the thing is, like, when you tell me to do something, so that's probably why you're saying that from an execution standpoint, because if you tell me to do something, I go and do it no matter what it is. Because I feel like I'm on the right track now, and I have faith that it's working. And I've actually seen so much improvement, just like in my in my numbers, my KPIs. I've seen so much improvement there that at least I can see that now. I can see it where the numbers are going up instead of down for once. So I just get I'm always one of my big things, and the big mistake that I made was thinking, okay, let me get really big and then it will fix everything. It's like you got me reading Profit First, and I don't want to, like, I'm not here to plug the book or anything, but a lot of that,
I'll plug it away.
a lot of that was true, but reading it with a lot of it was true for me because, the even specifically talks about, and that's kind of the way that I looked at it, is like, okay, well, I'll just get really big and that will solve my problems. Or I will do what this other e-commerce seller is doing that's supposedly successful. I assume they are, but maybe they're not. I don't know, either. So that's one of the big things in the e-commerce world is everyone always focuses on the top line revenue. They don't focus on the bottom line revenue. And so I've had to totally change my mindset after, basically 2 years, 2.5 years of focusing on nothing but the top line number and figuring the bottom line would fix itself. If I just sold enough, the bottom line would fix itself. To now, I'm just laser focused on the bottom line. And if I don't sell as much, and my sales go down and I don't have these big shiny bars or graphs to show off anymore, I am totally okay with that.
Yeah. That, what you just said, I'm going to pick up on this later in the conversation because I definitely want to dial into that, right? Because this is where, myself included, got so wrapped up in the top line, right? Sales is vanity, profit is sanity. This is a phrase that was told to me by one of my coaches. And I hold that close to the chest. But that aside, there are two main things that I picked up by what you just said, right? It's absolute conviction, right? You're absolutely convicted in the deep of your heart that you could do this, right? And the second one is the environment, right? Having people in your corner, whether it's a coach, it's a cheerleader, somebody to speak life into you, somebody to guide you. Like, those are the two things that I pulled away from, listening to you talk, was those two things, is having a solid growth contributing environment, and then having absolute conviction that as long as you're shown a path, you can do this, right? Yes, we're going to make mistakes. That's just a journey, right? We're all going to make mistakes, whether it's buying decisions, hiring the wrong people, spending money, on whatever, right? I mean, trust me, I've spent, my fair share amount of money on bad training. I would say bad training that didn't live up to the value, right? No matter what training I've gotten or that I paid for, I've always received something.
Yeah.
But oftentimes the training that I paid for did not live to the value that it promised, right?
Yeah.
Everything I do, I've been groomed to give 10x the value of what somebody's paid at the absolute minimum, right? So that's the lens that I typically view things as, man, can I deliver a minimum of a 10x value on the investment that this person has placed in. If I can't ethically do that, then obviously, there's a problem there, right?
Yep.
So I love that you put that out there as having conviction and surrounding yourself, and not that I'm pitching myself to be a coach for anybody that's listening or watching right now. In fact, I'm pretty booked up, but it's absolutely surrounding yourself with the right people. Not people talking about the good old days is in the when you're a quarterback or running back, or when you had that amazing girlfriend in high school, whatever. And if I see something go across the background, either mine or yours, it's probably my spouse's. But that being said, those are the two main things I really wanted to make sure that I heard correctly on. Let me dissect into something in your bio that as a father and as a husband, that choked me a little bit. You admitted something heartbreaking in your intake, and you said something to the effect that your 17-year-old daughter Lucy pointed out that since you started the business, right, all that you and your wife would do is fight. As a father and as a husband, how did that land with you? How did that comment land with you at that moment, especially as you're trying to save the ship?
Well, that hurt a lot. And I will say, and actually my wife, Christine, she's the bee's knees she's like my biggest fan and supporter. So that's always been great because that helps a little bit too. That it's not like, I have her in my back corner always being my biggest fan and cheerleader. So, I think for us is especially the problems would always occur, not around money or things like that, but it was more about like when we were working in the business, that seems like it always occur, like especially like packaging or shipping and things like that is like I'm always trying to figure out how to churn cash, which goes back to kind of the monster, right? So I'm always like ship, and she's like, it doesn't go out just like that. So and then we'd always end up fighting about it. So now the good thing is stuff like that's easy to solve. That problem is you just outsource it. So
yeah,
you just hire someone, and then you're done. So we corrected that problem. We just outsourced it after fighting and things like that. Now you also know too, I have had some health issues, and I'll share this in the podcast. But you referred me to a doctor that I've actually enjoyed working with quite a bit. You know, for like multiple years, I'd had some health struggles and some problems, and I've complained to doctors and been to different doctors. It never felt like I got a resolution, with the doctor that I was able to get connected with, for some men's health issues. He's actually been able to help me quite a bit, and started taking, I started taking the testosterone replacement, and I feel like a new man. I've even said, like, I even think from like a grumpiness standpoint, or getting upset easily or things like that, it just seems like a totally different world. And now, a part of me though is just being really pissed off. Like, I've been telling people for like 4 or 5 years, I think that this is an issue, help me, and no one would help. So, so then that gets me upset because then I think about like, well, how different would my life be? Or where would my business be if I had this, if I was in this mindset now as when I started 2 years ago, right? So where would I be if I was, function like this 17 years ago when I started my career? So that's hard, is regret. And so I just try to move on from that. And I can't change anything that happened in the past. I just have to focus on going forward. And one thing we talked about was, it was nice with New Year's coming, is basically, it's like taking a shovel and burying the things in the past, right? They're all learning lessons. Okay, they were very expensive mistakes, but I just have to focus on the things that are working now and continue to do those instead of falling back into old habits and behaviors.
Oh, I love that. Let me uh, let's dive into this a minute, because you said something that I think just about every person that has a heartbeat can resonate with, right? Is the regrets, right? Man, if I had done this, if someone would have listened to me 4 or 5 years ago, how would my life be? Whether it's a business, it's this or it's that, right? But, I'm of the belief, correct me if I'm wrong, I'd like to hear your stance on this. Everything happens for the reason at the time that it happens, right? Like, God prepared you in this season and throughout this journey for this very specific, right? Like God intended you to be right here, right now, in this situation, in this shape, in this season, for a very specific purpose, right? Had you been in a better health 4 or 5 years ago, would you have quit your job, right? You know, or had you been in a better mindset 2, 3 years ago, would you have done all these things to course correct in your business?
Yeah.
Right. So there's all these questions like, man, I wish I had, but were we ready for that? That's the question I have to ask myself is, man, I wish I was exposed to this 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I wish I had known about this 10 years ago. Was I ready for it? Was I ready to receive that? Either spiritually, mentally, physically. Was I ready for that moment, for that change? And I would bet you, no, I was not. And that's why God said, no, not today, right? Because you got to go through this journey. You've got to go and learn the lessons, right? And learn to appreciate the journey of this so that when the better life does occur, you appreciate it more. You have the sense of ownership, like, yeah, you see the life I have right now, but you don't see the darkness I went through for the last 4 or 5 years to get where I'm at, right? Darkness being spiritually, physically, mentally, and this is where a lot of people miss the gap is we see stuff on social media thinking, well, that person's got an excellent life, right? They see the highlight reel, but they don't see the darkness that we went through for the last 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right?
Well, that's 100% true. We've talked about that, like, with in the groups that I'm in with you and the other guys and stuff. And, I've said this with other people too. It's like, so often you hear from the person that's wildly successful. Sometimes it'd be nice to hear from the person that wasn't wildly successful that is now, because it's a lot easier to relate to that than the person that, is, you don't even understand how they got from A to B, right? So, you're exactly right. And then, who knows? I think the big thing is just not living in the past, because that's not going to do any good. If I do that,
Love that.
then just the resentment and the things like that, it's not healthy. I mean, and plus, what good is it going to do anyways? What change is it going to make? So, and if I start living there, then I could live there all day long. So I just had to stay out of it. I just have to keep looking forward. And, like I said, for work, for business, it's just the conviction. I've never really had a belief before. Like, I know I can do this. And so it's plus that's another thing too, is like when you actually have that belief, it's like you want to do anything you can to make it happen.
Yeah, you're right. 100% correct. And doing the small things consistently daily, man, helps fulfill that belief, right? Especially as you mentioned earlier, you're seeing improvements in your KPIs. Yeah, you're not having what the world would see as like, oh my gosh, he's amazingly successful, but you have a different definition of success, right? Your definition is different. Being able to live life on your own terms, be able to have the flexibility, the mobility, the security, that this new life, this new season brings you. So, that's your definition of success. And that's right there, man. That's amazing. So let's go in a different direction here, because you didn't put this on your intake, and if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. I can edit this out. But there is a different business that you started not too long ago, right?
Oh, yes.
Right. So it's and I kind of putting this out there for a little bit. I'll edit this part out. But let's get tactical for the entrepreneurs listening right now.
Okay.
Right? Because I feel that a lot of individuals are listening right now, where they're a builder, they're a founder, they're a business owner, or somebody who's aspiring to be an entrepreneur. Maybe they've tried it and they failed, and I hate to use that word term, failed, but they made mistakes and they went back into the shell thinking it's not for them. So for all of these individuals that's listening or watching right now, you said the hard lesson was to stop chasing revenue, right? And I love how you said that because that was my life early on as an entrepreneur because I didn't know any different, right? I didn't know any better. Like to your point, I thought as long as I got my top line high enough, everything else would sort
Yeah.
itself out, right? So for all those out there that's in that situation, maybe they have been chasing that top line. Maybe they're thinking, "Oh man, I've been crushing. I've been doing 50,000, 100,000, a million, right?" So those listening or watching, give us a specific example. What was a revenue generating activity that you were doing that was actually killing your profit? Can you give us some examples or a specific one?
Yes, I can give you a few. You know, there would be numerous times where I would make bad buys or try a different like product category
Mm, mm,
just to continue to move the top line revenue. Um, I think actually one of the biggest problems I made was seeing some of the bigger, seeing like some of the larger sellers out there in my business and thinking, oh, well, I'll just do what they do and that will make me
mm.
successful. Well, they may have a totally different business structure than I do. You know,
Correct.
they
Yep.
may make the revenue in totally different ways. I'm convinced that some of
Yeah.
these sellers don't even make that much revenue in selling products, right? Maybe they make it in things like cash back or credit card rewards
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
courses or other
100%.
things, because when I see it, I'm like, I guess at first you kind of like, well, surely it will work if you just, I think that's with me. Surely it will work if I give it enough time. But then after
Yeah.
two is like, well, crap, it doesn't work. Um,
Yeah.
so then you have to start thinking like, okay, let me stop focusing on what other people are doing. Let me figure out how to do what I need to do for my business to work.
I love that.
It's in Carl. One thing you had mentioned about, yes, I do have a side business as well too. That's actually turned out pretty good, and I think one of the things from that is looking at like, okay, for me, expenses was always a big problem. I would be,
Hmm.
I always, but again, that was all going back to scaling. Like, oh, well, if I just, buy more of this or, get more help generating revenue, you know, no matter what it costs, eventually the profit will come. So, but one thing I did build out of that is a leads database of like 25,000 leads. So,
Yeah.
we did start a side business with a friend of mine, a former coach, someone that I trust quite a bit. He happened to be in a place where
Nice.
he could take on, I guess you could say, like the manual labor part of it, and then we
Yeah.
could use like my intellectual property part of it is my contribution to it. So long story short, we were able to take, you know, from my business and the infrastructure I have set up with my employees and so forth, and we were able to start utilizing that to generate revenue from day one in a new business. It's not a lot, but it saved me about $1,000 a month in expenses right off the bat. It continues to bring in new leads, fresh leads to me, multiple times a week. It's turned into a really good business, and we came up with an idea that no one else is doing. Also,
That's
so
awesome.
that's really helped because now we're able to build a weekly stream of revenue that's basically with
Mm.
very little cost. And it's actually saved my primary business money, and it's not that expensive to operate this business. So by adding
Nice.
that and diversifying a little bit, it's been a lifesaver. So, and this business really
Nice.
started to take off.
That's nice, man. There's a few things that I want to, if time allows, I want to kind of pick or kind of expand on for a little bit. But a few things that I pulled out of here, out of what you just said, I really want to clarify for the person that's listening right now because if I understood correctly, you you instead of watching what everybody else is doing, trying to follow their path, you're like, you know what? I need to laser focus on what I'm doing and see what I'm doing wrong and see what's working for me and just laser focus on that while acknowledging what everybody else is doing, right, and giving them props and so forth, because everybody else has their own journey.
Right.
You said it perfectly, right? You don't know their journey. You don't know how they made that money. It could be from other types of incentives, whether it's cash back or affiliates or whatever, right?
Right.
And we didn't really dive into the specifics of your business. I mean, we kind of take this as a something we take for granted, because you and I have been in the industry I've been in it for almost 20 years, and you quite a few years, right? So some nuances here, or some things I want to clarify. You're building a business on the Amazon platform. You're using online arbitrage and retail arbitrage, basically just reselling products. Buying low, selling high, right? Just like we do on the stock market and so forth, and leads. It's basically saying, hey, here's a lot of products that I can't buy because I don't have enough money.
Exactly. Right. That's what it comes down to. I have a full organization because I spent all the money on the top line, right?
Yeah.
And then
absolutely.
it was able to just shift that manpower to another, to the new organization that actually has revenue coming in that's profitable.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. I love it. So again, focus on your own journey. Don't worry about what everybody else is doing. Can you pull some nuggets from that? Sure, but don't let that. And I've seen so many entrepreneurs get distracted by seeing that one thing that they're doing. They're like, oh man, I need to base my business on that. Whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Let's put some context into this, because you don't know what he's doing behind the scenes, right? Or she's doing behind the scenes. And I love that you diversified. And here's an area where I think a lot of entrepreneurs, when I say entrepreneurs, I'm using this as the broad term, as business owners, founders, anybody that's building their own business, because I live that life. I certainly know I've been there, right? But you mentioned something about diversifying. Talk to me about the entrepreneur that is diversifying too fast, right?
Yeah.
They start this business. For example, you started yours. You learn some skills. You're like, oh man, you see this leads business opportunity you can create, or this prep center, or 3PL, or you could create this, and you didn't quite bolt that down, the initial business, right? Then you go off starting that. Is that a good idea? I mean, what's your stance on like diversifying? How far do you diversify? Do you really need to get the bolts bolted down on your first business? I mean, talk me through that, because I want to clarify that, because I don't want somebody that's listening right, I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to go off start another business.
Right.
So what do you say there, North?
So I think that's a great question, and to be totally transparent, one of my biggest problems was always circling back to bright new shiny object or software or whatever it may be, only to try it. And since now we're talking more specific to what we do in the e-commerce world, one thing that I tried to do, and I spent a lot of money doing, was thinking, okay, before I really had, the business I was in nailed down or really successful, was, okay, well, maybe I'll start doing wholesale and brand direct. So, I paid like $15,000 for training for that. And then, another $5,000 or $10,000 for things associated with that. So, you're in for like $25,000 or $30,000 before you know it, just for that kind of stuff. But I wasn't successful enough in what I was already doing to even worry about that. So someone that we have as a common acquaintance, Ryan Kimura, he's a great guy. I remember talking to him. He does some mentoring with me. Very wildly successful guy. And one thing he mentioned was specifically, you really need to focus on one thing. Make sure you have it nailed down. And before that point, I had always been kind of all over the place. I think it goes back to my worries and fears of like, well, what happens if X happens? Well, then I need to have Y, or if Z happens, I need to have B, as my outlet. So, and I had to kind of let that go and just focus on, okay, here's what I'm going to work on, laser focus, just work on getting good at this, and work on limiting expenses. Now, that's where the leads list comes in, is I already had these expenses, so what was a way that I could utilize that to my advantage? I could either get rid of them totally, or I could say, well, hold on, I already have an entire operation that's doing a good job. I don't have the money to buy everything that they find. I only,
Yeah.
really need them for a very limited amount. And I have this giant leads database that I've spent, tens of thousands of dollars probably building. Is like, why don't we just put this all together and utilize this to actually have some income coming in? I mean, for me, if it just paid my virtual assistant, what I'm paying them each month, I would have been thrilled just to get rid of the expense. I didn't even really care if it made money. It was just getting rid of the expense. And another thing for me too was keeping them employed, because the last thing I wanted to do was let go of them, because
Yeah.
they didn't deserve it because of my incompetence. I wanted to make sure
Yeah.
to keep them. So this was a great way to be able to stick with this. The difference about the leads list is I'm doing the same thing that I'm doing already. So I'm not scattering myself into a whole new business. Where everything else I've done has always been like, I've had one step in one thing and one step in another. I've never been fully committed. This is
Yeah.
just, it's doing the same thing. It's just doing it, for some other people as well too, basically. So
I love that. I love that because what you took. See, and this is where a lot of entrepreneurs get wrong, and myself included. Yeah, I'm guilty as that. Is you took something that you were already doing, right? A process that you were already doing, and simply monetize it in the same vertical, same. It was a complementary service, right? So it wasn't like you're doing a car wash or a vending machine route or Airbnbs or whatever. It was something that's already a complementary. It was already part of your process. You just simply said, you know what? I'm going to outsource, not just outsource it, but I'm going to monetize it because I have perfected this process. I have honed my craft. And then, well, my existing business is now turning from a cash eating monster to a cash producing cow, right? So, I love that you specified that because too many people, and like you said, what Ryan told you is the laser focus on one thing until you got that bolted down, right? And so I love that you took something, you're creative, like, wait a minute, there's so much stuff here that I can buy. I just don't have the money, right? I'm not Warren Buffett.
right,
And so, and you took that and you monetized it, you systemized it, right? And so that was very strategic of you, man. And anybody that's listening and watching right now, that's the lesson that we need to be taking through this is like you took something that you're already doing, something you've already perfected in the sense of honing your craft, and you just positioned it in such a way that would not necessarily distract you. In fact, probably increase some alignment because by serving more people in that fashion, you learn more. You were able to systemize it, and you got that expense off of your books.
yes,
You know,
yes.
something else is paying for it,
And we
right?
talked about the top line revenue, and I think one of the biggest holdbacks for me the mental hurdles I had to jump through was being okay if things don't sell. Because you always want to see
Mm,
that top line going up. Well, the way to do that is to make things sell faster. The way to do that's by lowering the price. You do that, you lower margins. You do that, you lose money. So, you
yeah,
know, and I think that goes back to having the giant machine behind me too. Is like, well, I'm paying money for this, so I just need to churn inventory. So
yeah,
that goes nowhere. So it by putting it all to work together has really just changed the entire mechanics of my business.
yeah. Absolutely, love that, man. I appreciate you sharing that because, quite frankly, man, you know that can destroy a lot of businesses, right? It is focusing on the top line, focusing on that, and whatever's going to feed that, and not this. Because if you don't feed this, guess what? Nobody eats.
Yeah.
So in some ways, it could be counterintuitive to a lot of people. You think you were just like, well, as long as you focus on top line, everything else will sort itself out. Uh, no, because I lived that life for a very long time.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I was like, all right, nobody's talking about this, and unfortunately, this is and I hope somebody, or I hope anybody, in fact, that's listening right now, and knows that if you don't know, it's okay to ask, right? Because I don't know if you felt this way, but in my journey, I felt stupid about asking this because I thought there was some type of implied belief that I should have already known how to do that. Like I should already know how to do my numbers. I should already know how to manage my business, especially in e-com world, right? That's just not
Yeah.
talked about enough. There's not enough exposure. There's not enough information. There's not enough micro level coaching in consulting, if you will, to help entrepreneurs make sure their ship is not a sinking ship, right?
Yes, we talked about that just a week or two ago. That, and
Right.
that's been one of my big complaints. Is like there's so many people out there that will teach you how to start, and they'll teach you some basic things, and they'll teach you how to get going. But
Yeah.
almost no one out there, like we talked about that, like getting into the numbers down to the level that we get down into. There's really no one out there, well, other than you that I'm aware of, that does that. Really, everyone that's into coaching or training, they're all catered to a newbie. And so I kind
Yeah.
of wonder the people that like me, I'm embarrassed to say it, but I always figured I'd be good at running a business, but apparently I'm not. So now I've had to
Mm.
learn how to do it. Now I'm learning the proper foundation, which is, now I'm learning the proper foundation. And, I almost kind of wonder, there's probably a lot of sellers out there, the ones that are really super successful, just probably either had run another business before, or they just happen to be good at running a business too, right? So running the business is the hardest part, that I've
Yeah.
found, and that's what I've really needed to work on. That's totally changed for the better for me.
Yeah. One thing I want to clarify though, and you know this because I harp on this constantly, are these negative I am statements, right? We are not all naturally good at something. We do have the innate ability to be great at things, right? None of us are great at being an entrepreneur at the beginning, right? And so, one thing I want to kind of really reinforce is what I heard is you are working every day to be better at managing your
Yeah.
businesses. Not that you are not good, right? Because none of us were good at the beginning. We all had to take lessons learned. So I want to make sure I clarify that. But secondly, yes, I do believe that a lot of entrepreneurs that you see in the just in general, right, either in the econ space or just in general, they did have another business. They did have another business, whether it was successful or was not. If it was not, just because they took the lessons learned and and position them over to the new business as lessons learned, right? But even if, right, there are still nuances in each business that if you're not careful in managing, that you're not going to be successful, right? Because I'm of the belief, and I'm sure you could, especially after what you've been through, the journey you've been on for the last 6 months since you've been working with me, is if you don't measure everything, if there's any one part of your business that you don't measure, there's you're not managing.
Yes.
You're just allowing chaos, right? What cannot be measured cannot be improved. And that was a phrase I learned a long, long time ago. And so I try to apply this in every aspect, and not just a business, but in my life. How can I perform better from a KPI perspective? So that I can be a better person, be a better father, be a better dad, be a better entrepreneur, better coach, better mentee, right? Mentor. So this is an area I really want to make sure it's clarified.
Yeah.
But let's talk about a little bit before we start to wrap this up, man, because we're having some great conversations here. But this leads to this business. Why is this new leads business, this new digital business that you've created? Why is that working while the e-com store is, I would say, struggling, right? But it's on a different path. It started off on a very on a very different path, and it's thankfully on a path. But
Yeah.
while that is struggling, is it a difference between selling a product versus just being more digital? Is it lessons learned coming over to this? For those that are out there listening and watching, why the differences?
I would say probably 100% of it, or close to 100% of it, is what I've learned from my main e-commerce business with expense management and doing accounting and getting up to speed on doing accounting more properly. As you know, for anybody watching, I've kind of had some accounting chaos over the last couple of years. So, getting so now ingrained into the numbers has it just made all the difference in the world, because now I'm seeing that improvement in my main business too. One of the differences there is I still have like a lot of old inventory or other things being worked out or that are going to take some time to get through the system, I guess you'd say, where I learned that lesson. So when we started the brand new business from day one, from day one, I said, if the business can't pay for it, I think that what we agreed to, with the part, when I say we, I have a partner in it, and I was mainly putting in most of the money to start it, was basically like, after 2 months, I'm not putting any more money into it.
Love it.
That's done.
I love it.
So we have 2 months. If it doesn't make money in 2 months, we're not doing it anymore. It's just flat.
Love it.
I never had that mindset until when we really started working together on the business side, as opposed to the personal coaching, but more into the business coaching. That's when I started getting more into the mindset of the e-commerce business. That's a much bigger monster, so that's taking a longer time to unwind. But starting this fresh is how I would start. If I started my e-commerce business today, this is how I would do it. Like I'm doing the leads list business, where basically like, here's the capital, that's it. We're going to make it work. We're not taking on any expenses until they pay for themselves. And I think that's been the biggest difference, where I did it all backwards when I started the commerce business, was I figured if I build it big enough and I brought, if I was willing to pay for things out of my pocket, eventually I'd make enough money to recover everything. Where that's just, I've learned that doesn't work. That's why in this business, I said, here's the amount of money I'm willing to put in. I won't be upset if I lose it all, but I'm not putting any more in. We're going to make money.
Let me paraphrase this into something that I think a lot of people need to hear. And correct me if I'm wrong. What I heard here is you removed emotion out of this.
Correct.
You assigned a very specific deadline. Like, listen, it doesn't matter what our emotions are. It doesn't matter, if we're joyous and happy or whatever, right? Or, if we just want to you assigned a very specific deadline, and you made commitments. We're not going to do X, Y, and Z until X, Y, and Z is met. Here is a deadline. I think that was a very wise lesson that you took out of your previous chapter, or in this current chapter where you're learning, and you adopted it, right? So all those that are watching and listening right now, I hope you heard what Silas is saying. Is, when you come into a business, or you come into a new chapter, you've got to remove emotions. Because especially when it involves money, a lot of emotions get, they rise, they get sparked, because I get it. Things can flare up, right? We can get emotional when we lose money, or when we make money, right? It goes both ways. So I loved how you removed emotions out of the equation. You gave it a very specific deadline. If it meets this, great, we're going to continue moving forward. If it does not, no harm, no foul. We're going to take the lessons learned from that and move it into something different.
Yes.
Right? And you essentially said, that's it. And that's where a lot of entrepreneurs go. They go like, another 6 months, another 8 months, and before you know it, they've lost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in relationships and stress and everything else.
I think one of the big things was, Karl, is that with my primary business for such a long time, I looked at it as like, okay, well, there's the business pockets, and then there's my personal pockets. And if I can't put it in the business pockets, I'll just pay for it myself. But, when I came to you and start talking, I'm like, oh, the personal pockets are starting to run out. I got to figure something out, because eventually, they're going to be dry too. So where with the leads list business is like, okay, there was some seed money in it, but beside from that, it's like I said, I'm not taking anything out personally. I'm not paying for a penny personally after that. It either fails or it succeeds, and I think you're right. From an emotional standpoint, maybe that's helped. And now thinking this through is like, if it failed, I don't care. It wasn't. Obviously I didn't want it to fail, but I was emotionally invested into it. So
yeah. Well, if understanding what I'm hearing correctly, is it's not that you didn't care. It's just that you weren't going to get emotionally tied up in the process, right? Cool. Either it worked or it didn't. And if it didn't work, you're going to take the lessons learned and move on. And if it did work, great.
Yeah.
Let's keep moving forward and let's keep building, right? So it wasn't that you didn't care. It's just that you didn't get emotionally, tied up and allowing it to, make false decisions, right?
Exactly.
Because as you well know, when emotions arise, either low or or high, we don't make good decisions. So, as I mentioned earlier, you are an action taker, right? And when we discuss strategy, you don't debate it; you actually do it. So, walk us through, the launch of this leads business, right? I'm going to go back just a little bit because there's something here that I think we kind of hopped over. But walk us through the launch of this business. How quickly, and this is one area I really want to highlight, how quickly did you go from idea to first sale?
Oh gosh, we did that. I can't tell you how many days for sure, but it couldn't have been more than a week or two. I
Ooh,
think,
I love that.
and I think that's one of the things is just like in the other business I've looked at from the beginning is like everything needs to be done right. I need to have all the professional training and
Yes.
coaching. I need to have all the
Yeah.
information. And again, focusing on the top line revenue, where with this was kind of, I kind of like it, the bootstrapped. We're like,
Yeah.
I think that kind of helped is just putting a limit on everything and saying it's going to pay for itself after our initial seed investment. So,
Yeah.
and then my partner is great because he does things I don't want to do. I kind of keep a kind of a low profile about the business where he's more like the
Sure.
front man. So,
Yeah.
and he really needed it to work too because as you know, he went through Section 3 with Amazon and
Yeah.
and got through that. That's when they do an account review. He got through it just fine, no problems, but it really put a bitter taste in his mouth. I think
Yeah.
I don't want to speak
Understandable.
for him, but I think that's probably how he would describe it as a bitter taste. So he was really looking
Yeah.
for something new pretty quick. So it just kind of worked, and to where we're both like totally committed to the, I have these resources, you have this time, which is your resource. Let's get it done and going.
Yeah. I love that you put that out there, and I love what you said. And if I'm hearing correctly, is you didn't get stuck in analysis paralysis. You didn't wait for perfection. You took imperfect action, right? You went out there and attacked, and you just took the lessons learned and kept moving, right? You didn't wait months. You didn't wait weeks and years and so forth for the perfect whatever, right?
Right.
When you felt you had enough time, when you felt you had enough skill, knowledge, money, or whatever, because that's a feeling. We often wait for the feeling, and feelings come and go, and they're very, very, they're tricky, right? So I love how you condense that timeline. I want to challenge anybody that's watching or listening right now, or watching, is whatever it is that you're analyzing, whatever it is that you're like pondering, do it, right? Because, and I'm guilty of this as well as you said you are, man. We spend so much time in getting as much information to make us feel like, okay, I'm ready to go out there and do that one thing, right? Or to, well, I need it with this $1 more, or $100 more, or what have you. So to that person, I just want to encourage you, just go out there and do it imperfectly. Take that imperfect action and work on perfect progress, not perfect, perfection. That's where a lot of people get, wound up or get held up. Now, you told me your hard lesson was to stop chasing revenue,
Yeah.
focus on profit, right? And you did talk a little bit about this, but I really want to make sure that this is really pointed out for those that are listening and watching. How are you applying that lesson, or how are you applying that lesson to this new leads business so it doesn't become another monster, a cash eating monster at that?
Yes. Well, we are going to do profit first with this business as well too.
You're welcome, Mike Michalowicz.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we are going to do profit first. We do have the accounts with Blue Vine. Matter of fact, we're going to meet later this week to get our buckets set up. Right now, we've just had money sitting in revenue, so we're going to start splitting up our buckets now. You set
Nice.
everything up for how we're going to do, how we're going to split up the revenue. Um, I
Yeah.
think the main thing is just being super conservative on any expenses that we're taking on, just being as conservative.
Yeah.
That's the main thing because that's always my problem. Is I just it's so easy for me to make an emotional decision that I'll try this. So with the leads list business, just no, that's not. I'm going to get in the same fiscal mindset that I'm in with my primary business. So It's good having a partner too that's really concerned about it also, because we can rein each other in or rope each other in. Um, and not having, Carl, the more that I think about it, I think not having, it's almost like a stock. You always do better in stocks when you don't have an emotional attachment to them, right? So,
Agree.
kind of the same
Agree.
thing here. Again, I don't have it. I probably should have an emotional attachment since that business actually makes money already. So, but since I don't, once again, it's way easier to just be like, well, it's either going to fail or succeed on its own. So, uh,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. I
I
love
think
that.
just trying to be as fiscally responsible as we can from the very start.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, man. Thanks for sharing. So let's dive into an area that I think a lot of high achievers, entrepreneurs, founders, builders, business owners, leaders in general struggle with is the identity aspect, right? You're juggling a struggling business, and I hate to use the word struggling because I don't feel like struggling. I think you're on a better path now. So we'll talk about we'll say a rising phoenix, right? A business that's rising from the ashes, a booming leads business, from what I'm understanding, and a marriage that involves a teenager who's about to go to college. I've lived that life too. You mentioned in your bio that your identity is tied to success, and I think so many people, myself included, can resonate with that. So let me ask you, in your opinion, or in your world, when the wins aren't happening fast enough, and again, speaking from personal experience here, because I'm not the most patient. In fact, there's a phrase that I learned from Ben Newman, to chase things with aggressive patience, right? So when the wins aren't happening fast enough, how do you keep your identity from crashing?
Well, I think one thing for me is that, I think from recalling from the intake form, one thing is I've always felt like I've been good at different things, but I've never been successful or tried to even be successful at my own thing. So
Mm,
I think for me, this is where it circles back to just total belief. I just have total belief that if I keep working and improving and staying on the right path, then things will succeed eventually. I think one thing is I look at other people that are successful, and I look and I go, well, if they can do it, I know I can do it.
ooh, I love that.
I mean,
I love
why
that.
not? It's not, we're all human
Yeah,
beings. There's hundreds, there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people succeeding in this business every day. It's like,
yeah,
if I just keep staying, usually if I'm not interested in something, I'll just bail on it, right? So, or if it gets too hard, just bail on it if it's not that interesting. But this is something I'm really laser focused on. So every day I think if they can do it, then I absolutely know I can too. There's no reason I can't. I just need to learn the right formula. The good news is I like the term rising phoenix because that's the way that I feel, especially with closing the book on last year and the year before and looking at we're just going to focus on 2026 going forward because it does feel like that when you go and you do
yeah,
your P&L, which one thing Karl has me doing every Friday that I talk about all the time with other people in this business is finance Fridays. When I'm
yep,
looking at my books every week and I see like today I was just looking at them, it's not finance Friday, but I was looking at them, I see like, okay, I'm a little bit ahead, or okay, I've broken even. Just even that's just like a big achievement. It's
yeah,
like I'm still getting rid of bad inventory and just getting rid of. That's the other thing is just emotionally just getting rid of my mistakes and moving on forward.
yeah.
So it's just,
I
and
love
that
that.
actually brings a sense of joy. Is like okay, I feel like I'm finally on the right path and moving forward.
So I love what you just said there. And let me extract something here because there's a phrase that I live by, or that I'm a belief that I could put in my life. You said it, but let me say this so that those that are listening or watching can understand what you said. You didn't tie your identity to the results or to to the results, right? Whether it's money or anything of that nature. You tied your identity to the process, right? to your absolute conviction that I know that I can do this. I'm going to keep chasing it down, and you're starting to see the results of that, right? But you're tying your identity to the fact that you're the type of person that will follow direction, that will execute, and that's where your identity lies, not in the results, but in the process, in the journey of. Am I understanding
Yeah,
correctly?
actually, I hadn't thought about that until you just bring it up. But yes, I think it's because of that belief that's like I just know that given enough time,
Yeah.
it will work.
Well, yeah. I think that's where a lot of people go wrong is they tie their identity to that result, right? And it could be in their any area of their life. It doesn't have to be business, right? We've been talking a lot about business, but hell, we all go through different seasons, especially parents, especially us parents. For the first 15, 16 years of our lives is really about the kids, right? But as they flourish, as they grow their wings, well, our seasons change. And a lot of times we get to tie their identity that we're still the parents, right? But we're not the constant caregivers. They're able to make their own decisions.
Yeah.
Granted, some of them are pretty freaking stupid, but heck, I made those decisions too, so I'll give them some grace, just like grace was given to me. But we often tie our identities to the specific seasons, and that were a lot of people, myself included. I did different times when I sold my companies. I lost a big part of my identity because that's where a lot of people tied my identity to was the success that I achieved in e-commerce, right? All the different companies I've created and exited and sold, um, some of which didn't, that were not successful, but I took those lessons learned like you did, right? And moved them into a different business, and now it's flourishing, right? So let's start to move move towards wrapping up and closing because man, I feel like we could talk forever on this, but um, we've got to start. We got to get back on track. You are in the thick of it right now, right? And I love to get everybody's perspective in their different seasons, what grit looks like, right? Because grit looks differently in every season of life. So right now, in this very specific season that you're in, what is your definition of grit?
Well, yeah, I thought about that before the podcast. And my definition, actually, I think I have two definitions, and I'll give
Okay.
you the fun one second. So, I think grit is for me mentally getting into the place where you believe that you're going to succeed no matter what, not stopping,
Mm,
not considering it a failure. Look at how many people out there that have been inventors, or done, wonderful, huge, major accomplishments in the world that have failed many times but kept getting up and kept working.
yeah.
It's funny. I don't know if the story's true or not, but I heard this story. I had an uncle that was huge into racing. We're from Indianapolis area, so the Indy 500. Indy 500s here,
Mm,
obviously, a lot of people into racing. My uncle worked in the racing business, and he told me a story one time that about a Formula One team owner that started a team. He didn't have a sponsor, but to start the team, obviously, he needed to have a sponsor. And this was many years ago when things were a lot different than they are now. And he just started cold calling companies.
mm,
Started at the A's and started cold calling huge major corporations, all around the world. And he finally landed a sponsor. He didn't give up. It took a really long time, but he finally managed to land a sponsor. Do you know who that sponsor was, Carl?
no, I had no idea.
Well, the amazing thing about it was the fact that he never gave up because it was UOP Shadow. So he worked his way all the way from A's to the U's before he got a yes. So
Wow.
imagine had he given up at M or
Right?
or at H or something and just said, I've made so many hundreds of calls, I'm not doing it anymore. But he kept. Now again, I don't know if the story's true or not, but my uncle told me this story and said that allegedly it is. And even if it's not, I don't care. It's such a great story, but I've always
Right.
thought about that. Cold called hundreds and hundreds of major corporations all around the world, finally landed a huge major sponsor, which was United Oil Products or United Oil Petroleum, something like that. But UOP Shadow, it became a huge Formula One team. UOP Shadow, for anyone that's familiar with older Formula One teams, they're very famous, and they had some of the most beautiful cars ever in existence of racing.
Green.
But just imagine that story that you go through and you start alphabetically, and
Yeah.
fortunately you don't give up. You almost get to Z, but you land it and you start a huge Formula One team like that. So I think
That's awesome.
grit is things like that, when you just have the determination and you know that when you have a true
Yes.
belief that's going to work,
Yeah.
just knowing that giving enough time, and that's how I feel, just giving enough time, course correcting along the way, and then but it will work eventually.
Agree. Agree. What I heard right there, it replicates what I heard Ed Milet say all the time. In fact, he's got an amazing book, Power of One More. You're literally one more conversation, one more phone call, one more email, one more transaction from changing your life. And that story right there is the exact definition of that, right? You're literally one conversation, phone call, email, whatever, away from your biggest breakthrough in your entire life. And that's how we need to treat it, right? And so one thing is for sure, man, if we give up, right, we will definitely never succeed. And that's where a lot of people get hung up. So now, moving along, I talk about subtraction here a lot lately because we always talk about adding habits, systems, plans, or goals, or anything of that nature, right? But I say recently, but I've been more focused lately that we need to also to know when to subtract, right? When I'm talking about subtract, I'm talking about taking away one habit, one belief, or one friction point that you are actively trying to quit right now that is preventing you from that next chapter, that next great thing, right? Because a lot of people say, I'm going to do this, one new habit, one new system, one new process, but they don't talk about the habits they're going to stop doing, right? Financial anxiety, or always focusing on lack, or those things, right? So, what is one thing that you're actively trying to quit right now?
So, okay, I don't know if I'm actively trying. Well, I guess I am still actively trying to quit it because I did make a mistake recently and did this. So, well, and I know, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but for me, it's not making, it's not spending money. What's the word that I'm looking for? Without just thinking it through all the way. So sometimes I'll see something I'll think is too good of a deal to pass up, or I just, I get that warm and fuzzy, like I got to try this, I got to do this, so I'll do it. So
Yeah.
for me, I think it's getting rid of that. I've gotten way better at it. But the other day I did buy something, and I was like, oh, this might be great, let me do it. And I ended up buying something. I was like, and now I'm kind of like, man, this is going to take my focus away. I think it is great, but I really need to be focusing on what I need to be focusing on. I was like, damn it, why did I do that? Now I'm going to have to put it down, in my numbers. So I think I think for me, getting away from that. The second thing is I've started to think more and more, not that I have a lot of this, but I think there's some people that are takers. There's some different communities I'm in. I think there's some people that are takers and they're not givers. And I
Yep.
think and I think we've even talked about that, or I've heard you talk about it maybe. So, but
Yep.
trying to stay away or decouple myself from that,
Yes.
because you know, if someone's asking for advice or questions and then they don't want to take any of your advice or do anything with it or disagree with you, it's like that's not worth my time. I'm not
Agree.
I'm not doing that just for the conversational aspect of it anymore.
Agree.
And if someone's always, a negative Nelly or whatever you call them, trying to stay away from that too, because I don't want to be in their pity party. I have to always
Yeah.
be thinking about, positively and looking forward to what we can accomplish, not about all the problems or what we can't accomplish it. So
Yeah.
it's almost like time thieves. So trying to stay away from, not that there's a lot, but trying to stay away from time thieves as well too.
Ooh. I like how you said time thieves. I love that term time and energy thieves,
There you
right?
go. I like adding
Because,
energy to it. So yeah.
yeah. Well, because there's two finite things that we have that people often take, right? Is the energy and the time, that we pour into things. And so I love that. I say it in a different way. Don't be the asshole, right?
Yeah.
Don't be the asshole. Don't be the person who's always asking for advice. How did you do this? How did you do that? And you don't take the advice when you're given it, right? Or the success zombie. That person's always like, in glamour and this and so forth. They're always asking, how did you do this? And you just want to turn to the guy and be like, listen here, mofo. You know how to freaking do it. You're just lazy, right? You're not motivated. I hate to use the word lazy, but for lack of a better saying it, you're just not motivated or properly motivated. Let me put it that perspective, right? So I love that because the more successful you are going to attract a lot of those. And so you've got to learn how to put the proper filters in place to let the right people in who actually, like you did with Ryan, right? You approached him, and I know Ryan, and I've heard of him say he was very apprehensive, but he saw, like me, I saw in you, you're an action taker, right? You're not just the type of person who's always asking. You're taking action and then giving back, right? You're also giving back into other people, whether it's in my community or in others, right? So I love that you said that. Now, for the guy listening right now, or a gal, right? For the individual who is 50, 100, 200, 500,000 in debt and scared to launch the next thing, what do you have to say to him or her?
I think, well, honestly, I think it would be is if you're going to do it, make sure you have total conviction. Make sure that it's going to improve the position that you're in. Don't get in the situation where you're like me, where you have no idea what your numbers are or why they're the way they are. Make sure you get everything cleaned up. And then if you have that all done and you have total conviction that it will work, then go for it.
Yeah, you can always start over, right? Dust yourself off, start over.
Yeah. Well,
Love that.
I'm not a huge fan of this, but then also I totally get it, and I am a huge fan of it. But I've heard a few people say one of the beautiful things about America is you can always start over again. You can.
Yeah,
You know,
that is true.
I'm like, I kind of hate that advice, and I kind of love that advice at the same time because they're 100% right. You can always start over in America.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. So, as we're starting to wrap up, I've got a few more questions, and we'll wrap this up because I'm really loving the conversations here. When the lights go out and you're in the trenches, what is the one quote or directive that you repeat to yourself to keep moving forward?
Boy, Carl, I don't know what the answer to that is. I think I don't have one that I would say to keep moving forward. I more think that I'm so focused that I know that success is just right ahead to keep pushing. I think going back to the UOP shadow story, you just got to keep going through the phone book. Maybe that's my answer. Is you just got
Keep going through the phone book.
keep going through the phone book because eventually you'll get a yes.
Yeah, I like that. Keep going through the phone book.
I think that's going to be what you say.
awesome.
Is just keep going through the phone book. Just keep going through the phone book.
We got to make that stick. I actually like that. Of course, for people that's like a quarter of our age or half our age, you're like, what the heck's a phone book?
Exactly. Oh, I didn't even think about that. I thought I was old enough talking about the UOP Shadow Racing Team in Formula One. On a phone book. So, fortunately, I didn't say a Rolodex, Carl.
Right? I know. I hear you. I said that several times, and I get this deer in the headlights look like, did you just meant to say Rolex? Like, bro, if I said Rolex, we're in the wrong conversation.
Yeah. No,
Rolodex.
absolutely not.
I agree. All right. Lastly, as we wrap up, and this is an area I really want to harp in on because I'm of the belief that high achievers are expert critics of themselves, right? I want to take a moment for what I call as like the 60 seconds of grace. So, with that said, what is the one, uh, you know, one mistake or failure that you've made with your family, either with Christine, Lucy, and or your business during the stressful season that you've had to forgive yourself for?
For me, it would be a combination of the two. It would really be because of circling back to doing things like losing my temper or being angry or things like that, or being shut off emotionally because of not having success. And I think part of that goes back to the health that I've had too, and having to move on for that and try to, forgive myself, but also live better every day to be a better husband and father and not fall back into those, no matter how stressful things get, is not fall back into those bad behaviors.
Love it, man. Thanks for sharing it, man. All right, we're building a chain of iron here. So that being said, I'm doing something a little different than I don't think I've seen anybody do this. So, what is the one question that you would want to challenge my next guest with?
Ooh, the one question
Right?
I'd want to challenge your next guest with. Well, I think it would be the theme of our conversation. When things
Okay.
got really deep and you had a lot of fear and the things that kept you up at night, what made you ignore that and keep pushing through to get to where you got?
Ooh, I love that. All right. I can't tell you who the next guest is going to be, but I like that. I love that question. I do. That's a very good question, man. Thanks for sharing that. So awesome. Silas, I want to thank you. You know, we talk a lot about success on the show, but it takes a different type of courage to come on here and talk about the messy middle, right? So you while you're still fighting your way through it, I respect you not only as a client, my man, but I respect you as a husband, as a father, and as a fellow builder for doing this, right? So now, usually, this is the part where I ask guests, where people can follow you or follow them on Instagram or whatever platform that they're most on. But you're essentially a ghost on social media,
I,
which I can actually love,
Social
right?
media is not that important to me, so it's not a big
I
deal.
hear you.
Uh,
I hear you.
if anyone wants to check
But if
out
there's
our leads list, they're welcome to at
yeah,
oaprofitpipeline.com. That's not the reason I'm here though, but yeah,
yeah,
I enjoy watching and getting on social media sometimes, but I am not much for putting things on social media or marketing
yeah.
myself.
Oh, I get it. So let me ask you this, because I'm sure there's going to be at least one person out there who resonate with this story, and maybe they're in a hole right now and need to know, right? Uh, that they're not alone, or you're not alone. So where is the best place for them to find you, reach out to you just to say thank you? Granted, you may not be posting content, but I heard you say you do get on social media. So if you have are you on Facebook as Silas Anderson, so people can reach out to you and say thank you?
No,
Or
I'm not.
no? Okay,
No, I'm not
got
on
you.
Facebook. I'm not on. I have an Instagram account. I can't remember what my handle is. I think it's at the real Silas 317 or something like that. But yeah, so I am kind of a social media loser. I don't do anything. I'm not big into that. I am more of a content intaker than putter outer. So,
Putter
however,
outer.
there's an open invitation if anybody did want to reach out to me. That Karl, you're always welcome to give them my personal phone number and they could text me or my personal email address, and I'm more than happy to talk with people. So that's one thing
Yeah,
I need to do better at, and that I work on is trying to build more personal relationships. So I am
yeah,
certainly open to that.
gotcha. Well, thanks for sharing all of the information that you just provided. OA Profit Pipeline, I think it was. We'll link that in the show notes. Silas, thank you again for stepping into the arena today. Really appreciate the courage you displayed here. So, again, thank you. I appreciate you, man.
Thank you, Karl, for having me on. I appreciate it. I can't believe that we spent an hour and a half together.
Good time when we have fun. Time flies, or time flies when we have fun, right? So, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Karl. Bye.
We don't grow by just listening. We grow by doing. The gap between average and excellence is action, even imperfect action. You heard Silas today. The difference between staying stuck in debt and building a new future isn't that fear goes away. It's that you execute anyway. My challenge to you is simple. Take one specific tool or insight from this conversation. Maybe it's auditing your profit versus your revenue, and use it in the next 24 hours. Do not wait to feel ready. Action creates the feeling, but you cannot build a life of sustenance alone. If this episode added value to your life, do the unseen work of a leader and share it. Text this link to one friend or team member who needs to hear this message today. Be their catalyst for growth. I believe in you, and I will see you for the next rep. Let's get after it. There's one more version. I'm going to try one more time. We don't grow by just listening. We grow by doing. The gap between average and excellence is action, even imperfect action. You heard Silas today. The difference between staying stuck in debt and building a new future isn't that fear goes away. It's that you execute anyway. My challenge to you is simple. Take one specific tool or insight from this conversation. Maybe it's auditing your profit versus your revenue, and use it in the next 24 hours. Do not wait to feel ready. Action creates the feeling, but you cannot build a life of substance alone. If this episode added value to your life, do the unseen work of a leader and share it. Text this link to one friend or team member who needs to hear this message today. Be the catalyst for their growth. I believe in you, and I will see you for the next rep. Now let's get after it.